Arbus Magazine's new Fall Arts and Cultural issue has dropped and is currently available. Articles include a celebration and review of the Jacksonville Symphony's 75th anniversary, as well as the Ritz Theater's 25th anniversary. More info at arbus.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Ahead in the next 5 minutes, live local news for the First Coast from the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, we're talking about the biggest stories of the week. A former city housing official is arrested for fraud. The governor walks back a plan for hotels and golf courses on state parklands. College students face new limits on campus protests. The state's tourism website removes information for LGBTQ visitors, and more money could be coming for the Eastside, but it may take twice as long to get there. We'll talk about all that and more with our all-star panel on our Friday Week in Review. Then, an interview with Athens, Georgia musical legends Pylon Reenactment Society. You can join the conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937 or emailing firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. Reproductive rights is shaping up to be a key issue in the presidential election this year. NPR's Tamara Keith reports the Harris campaign is launching a fall bus tour to keep the issue in the spotlight.
Trump has boasted about being responsible for the Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. But now he says some state abortion bans are too restrictive, and he wants the federal government and insurance companies to pay for fertility treatments. The Harris campaign says Trump can't be trusted. IVF is already under attack in the post-Roe landscape, and he's responsible for women's freedoms being ripped away across the country. To spread that message, the Harris campaign is launching a 50-state Fighting for Reproductive Freedom bus tour, featuring a variety of surrogates. The first stop is Tuesday in Trump's backyard, Palm Beach, Florida. Tamara Keith, NPR News.
Meanwhile, in an interview with NBC News yesterday, Trump indicated he would vote in favor of abortion rights in Florida's ballot measure. But as Minnesota Public Radio's Clay Masters reports, his campaign pulled that back.
The campaign was quick to push back after the interview, saying President Trump has not yet said how he will vote on the ballot initiative in Florida. He simply reiterated that he believes 6 weeks is too short. Florida has a 6-week abortion ban in effect right now.
Clay Masters reporting. Germany has carried out its first deportation of convicted Afghan criminals since the return of the Taliban to power 3 years ago. NPR's Rob Schmitz has more.
The German government says it chartered a flight from Leipzig carrying 28 Afghan men to Kabul. The men were convicted of a range of crimes in Germany, including rape and narcotic sales. Germany does not have diplomatic relations with the Taliban government, but German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said the deportation of Afghans and Syrians would be allowed after recent attacks by nationals from both countries, including last week's attack by a Syrian man who killed 3 and injured 8 people at a festival in the western German city of Solingen. The killings have sparked a debate over Germany's asylum rules when it was revealed that the suspect should have been deported last year. Rob Schmitz, NPR News, Berlin.
Inflation was tamed this month. The Commerce Department says the Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, or PCE, the Fed's preferred inflation guide, showed that inflation rose 0.2% in August, with the year-over-year rate staying at 2.5%. Now, excluding volatile food and energy prices, the core PCE also rose 0.2%, though it was up 2.6% over the year. Now, that's all in line with what economists were expecting. Consumer spending rose 0.5%, while incomes were up 0.3% this month. U.S. futures contracts are trading higher. Dow futures up 0.1%, NASDAQ futures up 0.7%. This is NPR News.
On WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville, I'm Michelle Coram. The Jacksonville Housing Authority's former deputy chief of financial officer is accused of fraudulently using prepaid cards that were intended for residents forced out of their units for reasons out of their control. The arrest report for 57-year-old Greg Williams says he was arrested Wednesday on one count of fraudulent use of a credit card. Jail records show he bonded out on Thursday. According to the arrest record, an investigation started when the Housing Authority's former CFO told investigators 13 prepaid cards were missing. Labor Day weekend is here, and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission has a few reminders about boat safety. Elise Gregg has more.
FWC officers are patrolling waters this weekend, and they're asking boaters to make their jobs a little easier. The agency reported that last year they removed around 20 unsafe and impaired drivers from the water for boating under the influence, issuing nearly 400 citations. Under state law, boating under the influence can result in fines up to $1,000 or 6 months in jail for the first offense, with heavier penalties for repeat violations. Aside from that, the FWC reminds boaters to wear life jackets while on the water and to take boater safety courses before hitting the water. You can access boating education resources at myfwc.com/boating. I'm Elise Gregg in Miami.
Sunny and around 90 degrees this afternoon, down to the mid-70s tonight, a 20% chance of rain on Saturday afternoon.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include BritBox, dedicated to helping people discover British crime series, including new seasons of Silent Witness, Blue Lights, and The Responder starring Martin Freeman. Streaming at BritBox.com/NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics on First Coast Connect today, an affordable housing official accused of spending tax money on groceries and restaurants. Kids head back to school with new rules about campus protests. Bipartisan outrage stalls what the governor calls a half-baked plan to convert state parks into revenue streams. The Eastside will get community benefits, but not as quickly as planned. And the state's rainbow-friendly tourism website goes dark. To talk about all that and more, I'm joined by David Bauerlein, Metro reporter at the Florida Times-Union. Hi, David.
Good morning, Ann.
Good morning. Former reporter and journalism professor at the University of North Florida, Tricia Booker. Hi, Tricia.
Hi, Ann.
Attorney and former Jacksonville City Council member, Randy DeFoor. Good morning, Randy.
Good morning, Ann.
And a new face with us today, Action News reporter Nicholas Brooks. Hey, Nicholas.
Hey, Ann. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. So, David, let's get started with the arrest Wednesday of former Jacksonville Housing Authority Chief Financial Officer, Deputy Gregory Williams. What do we know about his arrest?
Well, we know that while he was at the Housing Authority had this system where they would give out prepaid cards to Housing Authority residents who needed help because they've been relocated from a unit for repairs or renovations, kind of just to help them keep their head above water. And the accusation is that the former deputy CFO was using these prepaid cards for his own personal benefit, such as going shopping at Publix, paying for meals at Biscotti's, which is in Avondale. It's a pretty upscale restaurant, certainly not the kind of place where a Housing Authority resident would be able to afford to go. And so he was arrested on a charge of credit card fraud. And it's just one more of a series of upheavals that this Housing Authority's had this year, with CEOs coming and going, and they're really having to work to stabilize just the basic nuts and bolts operation of that operation.
And let's talk a little bit about that. JHA is now on its third CEO in 6 months. The former president resigned. He'd been given a big bonus and was asking for an even bigger raise, and then all of a sudden he was ousted, essentially. Questions about his performance there. His replacement last only 6 months. There, years ago had been some ethical allegations about the former leader and sexual misconduct. What's going on at this agency? Do we know? Is it something that's endemic to this one agency, or what's happening?
I think that there has been that this arrest really reopens up all those criticisms the Housing Authority had about oversight. On the one hand, the Housing Authority has been reviewed very well over the years by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Certainly has a potential to be a real player in an affordable housing market and being able to help with this crisis everybody is facing. It's the issue is always that controls, are there internal controls? And in this case, the people doing the controls were also taking advantage, allegedly, of the prepaid cards. So I don't know. I mean, it's housing authorities often are agencies that are not. They don't have a lot of excess money. I mean, they're really just struggling to keep up with the basic needs of providing housing to low-income people, and so it's can make it possible, obviously, to cut corners sometimes. There's been a series of these cases over the years.
Tricia, it's worth mentioning. I mean, we're talking about an allegation. Obviously, he's innocent until proven guilty. And if he's even charged, he's only been arrested. And it's worth noting that this was a self-reported incident. So people within the agency spotted this abnormality. They reported it to the Office of Inspector General, which began an investigation. So in some ways, the system worked.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be the bright side of it. I mean, the optics of this, though, are so bad. I mean, I think that we don't see a lot of stories about the things that the Jacksonville Housing Authority or housing authorities in general do and how important they are to the people who use that money to survive. And I think oftentimes it gets a bad rap, like we are supporting people who don't want to work, or we're supporting people in poverty who don't want to help themselves. And then you have things like this happen, and I think people cast it all in the same boat, like it's just a total waste of money. And I think it's really too bad. It's obviously a misperception.
Randy, I want to ask you about this because, I mean, on some level, the scale of this fraud is just kind of ridiculous. We're talking about $50 gift cards, maybe $650 missing. And then you think about the graft and the allegations at an agency like JEA, where we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars at stake. And, the agency itself lost $63 million just because of its credit rating declining because of the scandal. So, I mean, what does this say, first of all, just about graft in government? And second of all, there's just no equivalence in some ways, is there, between, or is there?
Well, I believe the 13 prepaid cards equated to about $9,000. But to your point, yeah, they're both independent boards, independent agencies. It just goes to show you if you don't have the right, structure in place, that this can happen, whether it be $63 million or $9,000. I will say that this board at the Housing Authority has just changed over. So I believe we're going to see a lot more oversight. I believe there's probably going to be a total overhaul of this organization in the near future. I was on the council when I think it was McInnes was replaced, and that again was the product. He was removed by Office of Inspector General. That information came out. And then I think Dwayne Alexander also, left because of the prepaid cards, if I recall, because those prepaid cards were supposed to go to pay for JEA for utilities.
I think those other ones were, those were supposed to go towards utility payments,
right?
And very few of them were, and that was kind of what was behind Dwayne Alexander's departure.
Correct. Yeah. So we're seeing a repeat of history to a certain extent, but with this new administration and the change of the board members, I think we're going to see a total overhaul.
Nicholas, obviously things like this impact the public trust in agencies, and it does seem to draw attention when you're talking about these agencies, these independent city agencies with these boards that are supposed to be running, patrol over the leadership. What do you hear from the community about, just generally like trust in an agency like the Housing Authority?
Honestly, for this story is that I really can't have I don't really have a comment on that particular question for this story. So I'm going to I'm passing to the real experts on this, honestly.
Well, let's move on now to the changing landscape of protest on college campuses. We are talking with our panel of experts and journalists this morning, and you can reach us on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, and you can also watch us our live stream right now on YouTube or Facebook. Tricia, you are a professor at UNF. This week, students learned about how the school is planning to respond to the issue of protests on campus. Remind us of how we got here and what did we learn this week?
Well, I guess the way we got here was a protest that was occurring during the graduation ceremonies or just prior to the graduation ceremonies in May. There were a group of students on the campus green who were protesting against the war in Gaza. It wasn't a particularly outrageous protest. There was no violence or anything. It wasn't even that noisy. But they were arrested. 16 of them were arrested the night before graduation. Students in general were kind of confused because it seemed to be, by comparison, a relatively tame protest. But what happened was that the Board of Governors has added, the UNF Board of Governors has added some codicils to their current policies on how to handle the protest. It focuses on anything that interferes with, disrupts, or impedes academic programs or activities, or impedes the orderly conduct processes and functions of the university. It's also being referred to as the time, place, and manner regulation. I think what they're looking to do is kind of regulate how, when, why protests take place. Again, students are a little confused because there has been so much outrage about campus preachers. Now, they seem to be different things, but at the same time, the campus preachers, for example, have been very disruptive in a way that the protests have not been. There is hope and there is rumor that the campus security and that the administration is going to use these additional regulations to help stay the effects of the campus preachers and keep them from hurling insults and screaming and yelling at students. It'll be interesting to see.
Those of us who aren't on the campus daily probably don't know what the situation is that you're describing with preachers. Why are preachers disruptive?
Well, the preachers who come on campus frequently will stand on the green and scream at students. They use racial slurs, not racial slurs, but they have used racially insensitive language, but they also use anti-LGBT language. They've called women who are wearing skirts and shorts or have their midriffs showing appalling names. They tell students that they're going to hell. They follow them. Students who are on the campus studying, like sitting in a group, the preachers will be surrounding them, screaming. And there has been really no effort to stop them because it's a free speech issue. Campus preachers are allowed to come in this public area. But students have been really upset by it.
That's interesting. It seems like that would sort of border more on a harassment than just a free speech issue. But obviously, David, this is not just UNF. Schools across the country, colleges across the country are dealing with what they saw as disruptive and, in some cases, dangerous protests, some encampments that were, taking over college campuses. But a lot of new rules this year, not just at UNF, but Indiana University, University of California system, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and Vanderbilt. There's just a wide range of schools that are.
There really is, and I think a lot of it is a response to the tents that were erected, the idea of a protest being something that was a permanent fixture or semi-permanent, going on for hours and days. And so I think a lot of it is a reaction to that in terms of some of these limitations and restrictions that are going to be put on the manner of protests. And some of it, when Tricia read out that language, I mean, some of it is kind of vague to me. I mean, it says disruptive. Well, according to who? I mean, when Randy was a city council member, she's probably well aware that there would be protests on the steps of City Hall. And that could be viewed as, quote, disruptive to somebody who's trying to get in and out of City Hall. Now, if they put tents, made a tent camp on the steps of City Hall, maybe that raises it to a different level. But in whose view is it disruptive? If I'm out there studying on the green and somebody's leading a protest chant, is that disruptive? So I think there's probably going to be a lot of how it's applied is going to be really interesting to see how it's done in terms of some of the specifics. But I do think a lot of it's a reaction to the tents and the tent camps and the idea that this is still a hot issue in terms of the Israel-Hamas war.
Yeah. And Randy, there's emphasis in these new rules about them being content neutral. So these rules would be enforced regardless of what somebody's protesting about. And I think a lot of constitutional lawyers have said it passes muster. I mean, you're an attorney.
I totally agree with that. And if you look at case law back to 1972, I mean, time, place, and manner restrictions are allowed under the Constitution. So that, to your point, that means that the content has to be neutral. It's narrowly tailored. But one thing that hasn't been discussed here is the fact that students, I think that some students felt threatened. And the number one responsibility of our university campuses is to keep our students safe. And if you saw what happened on Columbia's campus and other campuses across the nation, I think it's very smart of UNF to put these restrictions in place. I mean, there are exclusions to First Amendment. You can't say fire, for instance. You can't say, I'm going to murder you. And some of that was, when you say from the river to the sea, some Jewish students took that as a threat. And so I applaud UNF for putting these restrictions in place.
At the same time, though, and I agree with you, but at the same time, when you have a campus like UNF where the students seem to have been protesting pretty responsibly, I think from a student standpoint, it's like they're putting the hammer down on us when we are voicing our opinion in a way that is respectful. So I can kind of see how they might feel like this is affront to their free speech.
Yeah, certainly there was some messaging by state officials in the wake of these more intensive protests. And to your point, Randy, sometimes seen as anti-Semitic protests that were occurring. And Florida officials said from the outset, kind of, that's not going to happen here, and really put the pressure on to bring some of these changes.
Right, just to protect the students, because it can get out of hand pretty quickly. So, again, I think it was a smart move.
Nicholas, you're much closer to that period in your life than the rest of us in terms of college campus protests. I think the students would say that there's some concern about a spontaneous protest. Not everything is planned. Not everything can get permission in advance. Sometimes these things happen organically, and they're concerned that this could impinge on their rights to sort of spontaneously have some sort of demonstration.
Number one, so you're right. I mean, I'm close to this area. With that being said, is they don't want to. I feel that they don't want to have any restrictions of freedom of speech, and stepping forward into making a change. They just want to be part of the change, if I'm not mistaken. They want to have the voices heard. And in many stories I've done once before in something like this, in this similarity, they just want to make a difference. And by doing so, putting their stamp in a place they're feeling like they're being, where something of an injustice is taking place. So they want to put their stamp of saying that, hey, look, I'm speaking out against this. So they responded or acted in the way that they think was best. Mm-hmm. And they don't really, and I don't believe they thought of the consequences or the backlash it could spark from that. The thing is, they just want to make their impact, their mark, and I think they did that. And they're facing the backlash or consequences with that. And if they have their restrictions of, freedom of speech or something like that, they're going to fight back. They're going to make their voice even louder. Mm-hmm. I mean, this thing happens in different situations. So I'm not surprised that they did this. I'm not surprised and I won't be surprised again if they do something like this, if again, they want the voices to be heard or if they are provoked with their rights.
Yeah. And David, this decision is, these proposed amendments are going to go before the Board of Trustees on September 30th. So far, we haven't seen anything brewing as yet on campus, but there could be very severe penalties for people who don't follow the new rules if they're approved.
Well, definitely. I mean, you might be risking your actual academic career and be expelled if you violate some of the rules. And Randy brought up the example of some of the rhetoric about from the river to the sea. Well, how do you enforce that within these rules? Does the university say, tell us what you're going to say, and if we don't like what you're going to say, you can't do it? Or is it a case where you get permission to have a rally, and then at that point, there's no restriction on what the content is of that speech. I think there's just a lot of questions on how you enforce, as there always are, these type of time, manner, and place restrictions.
Tricia, there's so many issues on campus currently. So I imagine this is one of just many discussions that you all are dealing with in terms of, agencies, DEI offices closing, tenure changes. But what are you hearing from teachers and students on this topic, if anything?
Regarding the protests?
These proposed rules.
I think again, they're confused. They're a little baffled by how hard they feel like the administration is coming down on an issue that hasn't become an issue yet. And you're absolutely right that it blends in with the DEI stuff. I mean, we recently lost the LGBTQ Center, we lost the Women's Center, we lost the Interfaith Center. So all of these different ways in which students can express themselves and express who they are seem to be disappearing. And this just seems to students, at least, and to faculty as another way in which the university is saying, okay, you can speak your mind, but do it over there in the corner where it's not going to bother anybody. Obviously, I'm being facetious, but I think that's the way they feel, like they're not allowed to be who they are.
If you're just joining us, we are talking about the week's biggest headlines with our panel of experts and journalists. Let's move on to a topic that galvanized residents, the future of state parks in Florida. You can join our conversation at 904-549-2937, or you can send an email to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Randy, this is as much a political story as it is a policy or a park story. So let's start with what the heck happened here?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure anybody really knows exactly what happened, other than the DEP, which is confusing in and of itself, came up with a plan to make changes to, I believe, 5 different parks, public parks, state parks, to add such things as golf courses, pickleball courts, a hotel. One of them was the Anastasia Park, and they wanted to put a 350-room hotel in that park. And it's really resulted in a huge outcry because, as you know, we have done a tremendous amount of work on conservation, trying to create more parks, not less parks, and for a lot of reasons, both from ecotourism to, the environmental impacts. I mean, golf courses take up a tremendous, not only do they, cut down trees, but they take up a tremendous amount of water. So it has really been shocking. But the other flip side of this is what a great opportunity. The public has come out saying, we really care about our parks. We want our parks. So I think it's a great opportunity to go in and not only secure our parks, protect our parks, but let's give the money to the parks that it needs, not golf courses.
I thought it was interesting that this was a really bipartisan coalition that came together. You had, all of the beaches mayors. You had people like Rory Diamond, who's a Republican, State Representative Cindy Stevenson, Rick Scott, Marco Rubio, and then, of course, sort of your general environmental coalitions coming together in support of this. It was, I think, probably such a strong response. It must have taken the folks that planned it by surprise.
I think they did not see. I think it was done in a way that it was not transparent, and I think they might have known that there might have been an outcry, but I don't think they anticipated the level of their response. $400 million was put aside by the Republican, State House and Senate for conservation from the O to O. I mean, this has been a priority for politicians across the board, both Democrats and Republicans, to, it's now or never in terms of conservation for property in the state of Florida, because there's so many people moving here that we're at risk of losing the Florida that we know. So
And we should say the O to O is the Osceola to the Okeechobee. It would remind me of what the O stand for.
Well, you're okay. I don't know. I can't remember exactly either. So, but it's
a giant swath of land in North Florida.
Giant swath of land in Central Florida to North Florida for ecotourism, and what a great gift! That's a forever gift, and the fact that this whole thing has been shocking. It really has.
You talk about transparency, and I want to just remind us of the timeline. So on Monday, August 19th, that was the day before primary day, this information was became public. It was sort of surfacing, David, on Facebook. Then on that Wednesday, DEP publicly defended. They did a series of social media posts saying, oh, there's a lot of confusion, but here are the details. And then on the 22nd, that Thursday, Governor DeSantis' office released a statement defending the proposal, saying that the goal is to make public lands more accessible. This was DeSantis' press secretary, Jeremy Redfern. So there was this defense of it. And then this week on Wednesday, the governor said this was half-baked. It wasn't ready for prime time. This was leaked to a left-wing group in order to create a narrative, he said. So what can we interpret from that timeline, David?
Well, we were talking about campus protests. This was a people power protest. It really drove it. There was just a lot of people who were up in arms about it. So it does show that sort of protest matters, can move policy. There was bipartisan opposition at almost every level of state government and local governments, as you mentioned, Dan. And also, I think it was something where maybe in DEP, when they were kicking around ideas, making parks more visitor friendly, it's like, well, we have more people want to stay overnight than we have space for. Let's put some hotel rooms in there. That may have sounded like on paper okay, but you think about Hanna Park in our own city-owned park. What if Mayor Donna Deegan came out tomorrow and said, I want to build a 350-room hotel on Hanna Park? People would go nuts. They'd go crazy. And it was the same way with these state parks. People feel ownership of them. They love them the way they are. They're like, if people want to build hotels, there's space outside the parks. Don't let that kind of commercial activity intrude on our parks more than it already is. So I think it just shows that that this is almost like a third rail. You really should, that doesn't mean it won't come up again. It may in 5 or 10 years. This idea seems to surface every 10 or 15 years or so, but it's going to be a long time before this comes back.
Tricia, I think to David's point, it was interesting. The DEP pulled back on plans. They were going to have meetings this past Tuesday, basically all at the same time in the middle of the day, which might have been difficult for people to attend. They pulled back from those meetings, but the protest went ahead. They weren't canceled.
Oh, yeah. I mean, from a journalism standpoint, this was really exciting to me. The information that was leaked was a press release, a really well-written press release from DEP that made this sound amazing, that we're going to have this amazing, these amazing improvements to parks. The media took this press release, they interpreted it correctly, they called experts, wrote these stories, and then the people read the media. They read the interpretation of this and came out. So, I mean, this is the way things are supposed to work. I thought it was incredible. I felt really proud of Florida.
We've got a call from Cynthia in Ortega. Good morning, Cynthia. Go ahead.
Good morning. I am really appalled that our Department of Environmental Protection has become an environmental destruction. I think it needs to be examined what has happened to government in the sunshine.
Thanks, Cynthia. I mean, it's funny. The DEP is often, I see various acronyms thrown around by people who are not supportive of some of their policies. For a while, they were called "Don't Expect Protection," Nicholas. I mean, I think people like to have fun with the name, but these agencies are sometimes, they're operating in the sunshine, as we said, required to. But if they have meetings that are not at a convenient time or on a hasty timeline that perhaps people don't have enough runway to prepare for, it can feel to some people that maybe they're not wanting to hear voices of protest.
I mean, many people that I spoke with about this story, they felt that way right there. They felt like it's lack of transparency. But the main thing was the many people that I spoke with this story, they were just so shocked the fact that they will have these plans in place up in the air because it's going to change. It's not going to be a park anymore. Many people I spoke with said that it's going to take away the integrity of it, the history of it, and the aspect of it. It's with commercial buildings. It's not. Anyway, long story short is that it will just turn a part from a commercial area, and that's what the people that was spoke to me about, and the transparency wasn't there. But that's what I was heard from the many different people I spoke with.
And Randy, it's interesting how things can be framed. I noted that one of the reports called the site where they were talking in Anastasia Island about putting a lodge as a borrow pit. But it's actually this historic coquina quarry that was mined to build the fort, the Castillo de
Right.
San Marcos in downtown. It's actually had a
Historic.
marker, a National Register of Historic Places designation for 52 years. So it is a borrow pit.
This is, again, and the thing about it is, I was talking to someone close to me and who actually goes and camps out in some of these parks. And she said Anastasia is one that's very hard to get into. So there is an issue there. But someone who goes and camps in a park, they don't want to stay in a hotel. It goes against the whole purpose of what the experience that they're trying to have. So, and I can tell you also, there are so many golf courses that have been abandoned in the state. When you have a downturn in an economy, a lot of times these golf courses are it's hard, they're expensive to maintain.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself doesn't make any sense. So this is just very, half-baked, maybe the appropriate description of it. But it's just a very, very bad idea.
Well, if you're just tuning in, I'm talking to Nicholas Brooks, Tricia Booker, Randy DeFoor, and David Bauerlein about the week's big headlines. You can join our conversation by calling 904-549-2937 or by emailing firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Let's move on now to what was a challenging period this week for advocates of LGBT rights and recognitions. First, the state erasing its travel page, highlighting gay tourism. Tricia, what do we know about the disappearance of this webpage? I know the New York Times reported on it, but perhaps NBC had initially discovered this page was missing.
I think the short answer is not much. It just disappeared, and there was no announcement. There was no talk about it. It just disappeared. LGBT advocates noticed it first and began complaining about it. And Governor DeSantis said he did not know that it was going to disappear. It just did, but that it doesn't matter anyway because he's not distinguishing tourists on the basis of sexuality. He said something kind of like that. The LGBT advocates who I've spoken to said it is a natural way to discourage people from coming to Florida because it would be different if it had never been there. But the fact that it was there and has disappeared makes it sound like, well, listen, we're not really interested in telling you anything special about this state for you.
So Visit Florida is a taxpayer-funded organization. Randy, it's a public-private kind of organization. At a meeting, the head of that agency said it's simple. Marketing is our organization's marketing strategy, our materials, and our content must align with the state because they're taxpayer-funded. Basically saying that they can't be recognizing any particular group that sort of falls in line with recent legislation at the state level in Florida.
Well, it sounds like that's exactly what happened, and that's why that website was taken down. It's unfortunate. I mean, we want everybody to come to the state. Everybody's welcome here.
There are still dedicated pages up for African American travelers, specifically Hispanic travelers. So the removal of this, David, is it's a little bit separate from these other targeted tourist efforts. The state has generally found advocating for specific groups of tourism really does help generate income.
Well, it does. And that's the thing. Florida has a very sophisticated tourism operation with marketing and recruitment. And they do have that sort of, you can call it niche tourism, just basically, somebody is perusing the Visit Florida site and they have a certain interest in something, it's there. And, if you're from outside Florida and you're an LBGT person wants to go to Florida, that's probably something you'd want to find out at any state site. And they used to offer that information and don't. And, I think some of the local tourism agencies still are doing that. So you can, but yeah, it does continue this ongoing effort. We saw it here in terms of, the Acosta Bridge not being lit up with the pride colors this summer because it was Florida Freedom Summer the whole year. There's things like that where there are certain aspects of this very diverse state that are, if not celebrated, called attention to, but LGBT issues are not in that category anymore, it would seem,
And
at
there's
least under this governor.
no sacred cows, right? I mean, this very issue was the center of the battle between our governor and Disney because that, enterprise, theme park, whatever it is, spoke out against the Don't Say Gay, what's known as the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. And so that was, I think, seen as a sacred cow by a lot of people. Disney is this huge tourist magnet for the state, in many ways shares an identity with the state as much as oranges, and
Right.
sunshine. But that proved not to be the case.
Yeah, exactly. That's another example of this whole culture war that's been going on really for a few years now. And I understand the argument would be, well, we should just market Florida without any kind of distinctions among tourists. But clearly, as you pointed out, Dan, they do that in terms of some of these distinctions and some of the niche audience or markets they're trying to reach. It's a sophisticated operation, and it could be that Florida tourism will be hurt as a result of this, and that seems to be the price the state is willing to pay.
And Nicholas, it's interesting because, the idea of targeting or niche tourism, like David says, has an appeal in terms of people looking to a place and saying, I can find my people here, whether it's businesses that are owned by other gay people or are by their definition welcoming. But the same thing applies to tourism that's designed for Black tourists or for Hispanic tourists, that they're looking to kind of find a comfort zone.
Exactly. I mean, it's something that what any person would do when they go into a new place. They need to do their research, find out where their group is. Once they find out where their group is, they find their hub. So I think that's a great niche for people use that resource just to find their area.
We've got a call from Dennis on the South Side. Good morning, Dennis. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious. I was listening to the tail end of the conversation about state parks, and I read on numerous sites about the organizations, corporations that were involved, kind of a shady, Delaware hidden corporate identities, Folds of Honor, and also Tuskegee Dunes, and the idea that they were going to be donating this money to these charitable organizations. Just wonder if there's any more information about that.
I mean, I do know that the Palm Beach Post and the Tampa Bay Times have been doing some great reporting, Randy, digging into some of the background of these agencies that were pushing for these. But I don't know that we have a great sense of it. I mean, there was, as he says, this Tuskegee Dunes
Right.
group. They kind of created a Twitter identity and then immediately
Right.
disavowed, said they weren't going to be building this thing after getting feedback. But we don't really know who they are.
We really don't know who they are. And the interesting thing is we thought the money was going to go to the parks, but then it was going to these nonprofits. I mean, it is so confusing. Again, transparency is an issue here, but I believe it's dead. I mean, the people have spoken.
All right. I want to move on now to a story, Nicholas, that you covered this week. You've been digging into the historic disenfranchisement of Moncrief, a neighborhood that is often known for less savory things than beautification, but you've been looking specifically at beautification dollars intended for this neighborhood. So what have you been able to find out?
Well, first of all, excuse me, what I did before I started the story, I went straight to the people in Moncrief. They told me and laid out all the issues that they were facing with. We're talking about with bad roads, with non-upgraded crosswalks. That's dangerous for kids walking from one side of the road to another. And I went to the city council meeting that took place on August 21st, where one of the person that's a council member spearheading this project, beautification project, is going to be Jacoby Pittman. And she unveiled a beautification / revitalization plan. The thing is, though, that sounded so familiar because they did something about that in 2019. So I asked the question, what happened to this? Did this happen? And in an interview, she said that it fell through. So I asked the question why, and she said that she was new in her role and just unprepared with the unforeseen challenges. So in this new unveiling plan that took place on August 21st, which is only a proposal, by the way, it's only just above $1.8 million. It's going to have new roundabouts from Moncrief Road all the way to 45th Street. It's going to have new roads itself. It's going to have new crosswalks upgraded and whatnot. But the people that I spoke with, I had a guy I talked with named, he goes by Uncle Nate, been there for several years. Well, he born and raised there, I should say. And he said he's seen a lot of things, but he saw no improvements. And so he's not holding his breath for this project. But Jacoby Pitney is ensuring that if this thing gets passed, construction could begin. Well, the design will start place this year. Construction could begin between 2025 to 2026 and fully completed in 2027.
This previous project that you found out about or you were talking to residents about was over $4 million that was allocated, and then just the project never materialized?
It was specifically $4.2 million came from the city budget. It never happened. And the reason that Jacoby Pittman gave me was that just dropped the ball on it because unprepared for the unforeseen challenges that she just couldn't prepare for. But she says she's now picking up the ball again because she now knows what she didn't know back in 2019. But still, though, you're leaving people in Moncrief, in the dark with no improvements year after year. And people that I spoke with said that places like the Lift Every Voice Sing Park, it's done just like that. Their words. Why not them?
Randy, I want to ask you about that. I mean, what happens when a project has allocated money like this and then just doesn't materialize?
Yeah, I think we need to keep digging on that. That doesn't make any sense to me. I actually reached out to my old ECA to say, what happened to that project?
What's what's an ECA?
Executive, basically my assistant, my former assistant on the city council.
Mm-hmm.
Because that doesn't make any sense. When the money has been allocated, they can't just take the money. I mean, the money doesn't just disappear. So something happened. There's more to this story.
Yeah.
So I would urge you to keep digging.
Mm-hmm.
David, you do a lot of city, probably more than you care to, city council meetings and covering city government and budget. What do we think may have happened here to an allocation like that? And should we have faith that an additional allocation this year, if it's approved, would take root?
Yeah, if there was an allocation, then the money should be there still, unless there was a future vote to change that and reverse that decision to put the funding into whatever that program was. So I would think the money is still there unless there was a future vote by city council to say otherwise. It does, and Nicholas said it's very good reporting by Nicholas. This is something that often comes up when you talk to residents in that area of town, 32209 zip code, one of the poorest zip codes in the state. And there's a sense that you drive around Jacksonville and they see investment happening elsewhere. It's not happening either from the private sector or from the city of Jacksonville. And, and plans are great, but they want to see something actually happen, and they want to see it happen consistently.
And Tricia, this is an area that we often hear about crime in that area. Their statistics are really shocking. Their crime rate is 83% higher than the national average, as Nicholas reported. Violent crime is 64% higher than the national average. Property crime is 87% higher than the national average. So they are a community dealing with a really a terrible crime problem. Beautification may not ever even be the top issue that they have, but when something like this is allocated and doesn't occur, I'm sure it's dispiriting.
I can't even imagine how difficult it is for the community of Moncrief to know that money was there and not spent on them. And yeah, I mean, beautification is important and could lead to safety measures, but it seems like there's stuff that could have been done. I know we're going to talk about the Eastside as well, but I can't imagine how difficult it is for them to see like areas like Springfield really just spring up and the city bending over backwards to help with build the stadium, which is so nearby. And they just seem, and I know there are people who say, well, that's apples and oranges. I don't know. If you're in Moncrief, it seems like a bunch of apples that you're not getting.
David, just briefly, because we are kind of short on time, but let's talk about the CBA, the Community Benefits Agreement. It got a little nudgehead, this approval by a committee this week. What is going to happen with the Eastside?
Well, it's like the Eastside will get $40 million for that neighborhood over 7 years. So that is more than the $30 million was originally proposed, stretched out over a little longer period of time. So the east side, I think, came out well in this. Then for the rest of the county, it's $40 million. That's spread over 30 years. You can argue that that's negligible, and the city probably would be spending that amount of money anyway on some of these various programs they do. So not a huge bump for neighborhoods like Moncrief, for example. But the east side could be a case where you really have a shift with this funding. So we'll see whether it is possible to break generational poverty.
Well, Tricia Booker, David Bauerlein, Nicholas Brooks, and Randy DeFoor, thank you all so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank
Ann.
you, Ann.
Up next, JME contributor Hurley Winkler sits down with Athens, Georgia musical legends Pylon Reenactment Society.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. Serious injury cases are complex, and civil trial attorneys present the evidence juries need to see and hear. More at waynehogan.law.
The Jax Chamber is proud to announce Lakita Span of Mr. Potato Spread is the 2024 overall Small Business Leader of the Year. Mr. Potato Spread has 2 locations, a food truck and catering services. Congratulations to Lakita Span. More at jaxchamber.com.
On the next Florida Roundup, birds, bees, and pickleball. Pickleball? A state plan to build a golf course and, yes, pickleball courts in a handful of state parks will be revised after howls of complaints. This is Tom Hudson. How do you use state parks? Email us now, radio@thefloridaroundup.org. Then be sure to join us Friday, noon until 1.
On the next Fresh Air, our series Classic Films and Movie Icons continues, featuring archive interviews with Clint Eastwood and Eli Wallach, who both starred in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And historian Christopher Frayling tells us how the film's director, Sergio Leone, broke many of the conventions of Hollywood Westerns. Join us.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
Why wait until October? Special counsel Jack Smith has an August surprise and files a superseding indictment in his election interference case against Donald Trump. Running mate J.D. Vance calls the lawsuit lipstick on a pig.
He should be ashamed of himself, and it's one of the reasons why we have to win, because he should not be anywhere near power.
Next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
I'm sure that any well-versed music fan is aware of the unmistakable impact of the Athens, Georgia music scene on rock music. Bands like REM and the B-52s emerged from the small college town in central Georgia in the early 80s. Another incredible band active in the scene was Pylon. Today, Pylon's original lead singer, Vanessa Briscoe Hay, still fronts the band, now called Pylon Reenactment Society.
It's kind of what we called ourselves as a joke. We called ourselves the Pylon Historical Reenactment Society.
They're coming to Jackrabbits here in Jacksonville on August 31st, and I spoke with Vanessa Briscoe Hay about the evolution of Pylon. Here's our conversation. You came to music by way of visual art, and I've read that you weren't initially interested in fronting a band because you didn't necessarily consider yourself musical. But now, all these decades later, you're still fronting this great band. How did your identity and confidence as a musician evolve through the years?
I came from a really great art school that led to a lot of thinking outside the box. That gave us kind of the feeling that we could do anything that we wanted to do. The members of Pylon had actually auditioned several people before they auditioned me. And one of the things that led them to say yes to me, bring me into the band, as I was on the same page. I was willing to have my mind open to what was happening and not have any preconceptions about how things should occur or happen. And that's how we wrote. It was a bit like making art.
Has the punk rock ethos influenced areas of your life beyond music?
Yes, I would have to say so. There's a lot of the thing about early punk music and the people involved in that movement, is that it was an inclusive scene. Women were maybe made for the first time in the music business to feel like they could be in control of what was happening. I felt like I could do anything that I wanted to do. Even as a mother, and when I worked as a nurse for 21 years.
I've always found your voice so energizing and stoic. Whenever I'm on my way to something nerve-wracking, like a job interview or something like that, I'll put on Pylon and just scream, sing along, and it gives me like magical powers. To you, in your body and in your heart and maybe even in your spirit, how does it feel to sing these songs?
It's not exactly an out of the body experience, but it's like I feel kind of like a oneness with everything. I sometimes feel like I'm in the best band in the world. It is a very powerful, addictive thing to be able to sing and just let it fly and let it go. And people go, how you sound so strong and angry, but I meet you in real life and you're so calm. Maybe I'm calm because I can let go of a lot of that aggressive emotion.
These days, as the front woman of Pylon Reenactment Society, what do you hope to be reenacting at your shows?
Traveling around the country, I've met so many younger musicians and younger women who were influenced or say they were influenced by Pylon. And I've really enjoyed working with the people in Pylon Reenactment Society because we just couldn't help ourselves. We started writing new material. We used Pylon as our guide star, so to speak.
What elements about those old Pylon songs feel like maybe the brightest guide stars for you in writing music today?
Anything that has, a good dance beat. The way that we worked is we wrote together, and it was like being part of a machine. Everybody had their own part. They interlock. I would just let my mind open up to come up with my part that fit into the machinery. And that's what I continue to do now.
Your every move I saw like a mansion. You borrowed some money, went out and bought a six-pack.
None of these songs are ever written alike. I don't have like a template.
When it comes to cultivating a music community today, do you have any advice for musicians?
Our motivation was maybe to have fun and, create something to do, because that time in Athens, there was really not much of anywhere to go. It was a house party scene.
Well, Vanessa, I'll see you and the rest of Pylon Reenactment Society at Jackrabbits on August 31st. Thank you for chatting with me today, and thank you for all the great music through the years.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Hurley. I can't wait to come to Jacksonville. I'm really looking forward to it.
Don't miss Pylon Reenactment Society at Jackrabbits on August 31st. For tickets and more information, head over to jacksmusic.org/calendar. If you want to learn about great bands coming through town, Join me, Hurley Winkler, every Saturday night at 8 for the Jax Music Hour, right here on WJCT News 89.9.
Thanks, Hurley. And you can really hear the Athens, Georgia in that band. It's amazing. But that's our program. We will be out Monday for Labor Day, but we'll be back Tuesday morning to discuss the support, stories, and resources available to families living with unsolved homicides. Part of the upcoming Cold Case Symposium at the University of North Florida. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
A new medical specialty is gaining traction on the streets of a major city. I'm Dr. Joe Servin. Join me tomorrow at 4 for What's Health Got to Do with It, only in WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville.